I guess I'll start with my introduction. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Matt Feehan. I'm an Army strategist, actually. I'm not a cyber guy, so don't ask me why I'm in DODIN, but I am. So what I do up there is I'm the Chief of Plans, the J53, and I'm responsible for all the planning that JFHQ DODIN does. How I got that job actually is my previous job. I was military faculty at National Defense University in the College of Information and Cyberspace, which for those of you that don't know was the old RIMC, Information Resource Management College, which was the DOD CIO's school for many years. So I was there for 4 years and taught cyber planning as well as some of the CIO side of the house. And so I was ordered to come up here and give this class to you, and I'm happy to be there. So that's a little bit about my background. But before I get going, I firmly believe this. There really aren't that many experts in cyber policy. There are many experts in cyber technology, but I think that policy is where we get more philosophical. And if you've been in some of the rooms I've been in, we still debate what is the DODIN. We debate where does the DODIN end and where does the DODIN not end. And so I'm saying all that to encourage a bit more of a conversation today. I've got some slides I'm going to go through. I'm going to set up a problem statement. But what I'm really looking for from you, hopefully, and we've got some mics out there, is more of a discussion, because I'm hoping that there's more expertise in this room than just me. So with that, I guess we'll get going. Here's my disclaimer. I'll let you read my disclaimer. I didn't know I had one. I snuck that slide in. Okay. Right. Okay, good deal. All right, so the context for what we're going to be talking about, obviously, most of you should be familiar with the military combat development cycle, right? And so I would say that colloquially, we could call that Goldwater Nichols, right? So you remember what happened in Vietnam, of course. The military departments were actually in charge of not only fighting the war, but also developing all the technology. So if the United States Army wanted a new tank to go and fight, then they just went out and bought a new tank, and they did that. And that was great, but essentially what we had back then, of course, was 3 or 4 different militaries trying to fight the same war. And so after that, we learned, and so we came up with Goldwater Nichols in 1986, which essentially created the combatant commands, solidified the SecDef's role over procurement, and then gave the actual combatant commanders the responsibility for deciding what their requirements were to prosecute their mission that they got directly from the president, and then relegated the services to the role of developing the technology, the tools, equipment, what we call .mlpf, which is essentially, hey, Army, I'm Indo-PACOM, and I want something that can land and drive across a beach. Okay, I will go out and I will build that for you, and then I will give it to you as a combatant command. Okay. So that's kind of the short version of this slide, and for many years that has worked, and I think we've been successful at that. There are lately, and this is a bit of a sidebar conversation, but I'm aware of some people who think that maybe Goldwater Nichols needs an update as our world gets smaller, and in particular some of the effects of cyber. So we don't really see Indo-PACOM now is a separate problem from what we would see EUCOM or what we would see AFRICOM. Guess what? It's all related, and in many cases it kind of always has been. But we're not really here to talk about rewriting Goldwater Nichols. So that's kind of where we are. And then, of course, we get to this cyber thing, right? And so cyber, when it started, right, it was just a bunch of people sharing pictures on an internet. And then DOD came along and said, well, that'd be really handy. Let's take some of that. And so now we start building what we now, of course, refer to as the cyber domain, right? But it didn't, but like many things in government, right, it kind of starts as one thing, and then it gains speed, and then it gets to something else. And so, along the way, just like what we were doing before Cohen, we noticed that all the military departments and agencies within the military, and of course the federal government, was just running out and buying whatever IT equipment they wanted. And then Congress said, hey, I got a better idea. Why don't we make it more efficient and more effective? And then, of course, now we get Klinger-Cohen, which from a Department of Defense standpoint was largely just to increase economies and efficiencies, if you will. Right. Well, then we move forward, and now we declare cyberspace as an operational domain, and now we actually have to fight in this environment. And so we move forward, and we sort of operationalize DISA a little bit. We create this thing called U.S. Cyber Command, and now they're a 4-star headquarters, and moving on and so forth. And now cyber is an operational domain, and so now we have to go back and ask the question, which is kind of obvious, is what the role of the CIO and Klinger-Cohen, is that actually answering the mail for cyberspace as an operational domain? And I'm not going to answer that. I would like to hear what you think about that. And hopefully I don't need to go through this whole process for cyberspace, but essentially what it means is that the combatant commanders who would be identifying requirements for the other domains, land, sea, air, et cetera, I guess now space, they would identify a requirement, and then the SecDef would assign that to a military department that would develop that requirement, right? But in the cyber domain, it doesn't work like that. It goes through the CIO channels, and particularly it follows most of Klinger-Cohen. Okay? And so, obviously, there's a little bit of, I guess, discussion about, okay, well, what is the system that we really need to be following? Okay? And so here you can see a slide that it kind of lays out a little bit about what I'm talking about, right? So on the right hand, right, if you look at the procurement of cyber domain technology or IT equipment, however you want to say it, if you look at it from the CIO lens, right, there's an understanding of technical risk. There's an authorization process, right, which is, okay, is this configured properly? Has it been tested? Has it been vetted? And it's good to go on the network, or the DODIN, the DoD Information Network, as we call it. It's informed by .mil PFP, which is to say that, yes, there's been some thought into what it can actually do and why we actually want it, right? I mean, we didn't just buy it because somebody was selling it. We bought it because we wanted it. And then after that, it's put on the network. And then at that point, it becomes a responsibility of JFHQ DODIN, of course, to secure, operate, and defend. Okay, so if you look at it from the combatant commander's perspective, right, in this case, Cybercom, but not just Cybercom, right, because Cybercom is not the only combatant command that actually has to fight in the cyber domain. We're the ones that are fully responsible for it, but the others obviously are concerned. So there's this clear understanding of operational risk. We've designated an accountable commander and director, and that kind of gets to one of the heart of the questions here. In the, quote, CIO world, right, who is responsible for the cyber domain of an organization that has a CIO? Well, that's the CIO. In Department of Defense, I would say historically for a while, we allowed the sort of the J6 CIO lens to say, okay, J6, you're responsible for my network. I want to make sure it works. Well, guess what? As times have changed and cyber has become more of a warfighting domain, operational commanders can no longer afford to put that risk at the J6 or COMO or communications director's role. They can't do that. It's now affecting the entire mission, not just whether or not I can send email. Now it's whether or not I can employ my weapon systems. It's whether or not I can command and control. It's whether or not. So if my cyber domain is failing, then my mission is failing, and that's a real problem. And so in this model here, we're mission dependent. We don't have cyber equipment or cyber domain doing something that isn't a part of my mission. And we've aligned with the Cyberspace Forces Operational Construct, DCOCO and DSO-IDM. And we have this operational command framework, which really is a fancy way of saying that we have one person who's responsible for the risk versus the mission, versus Department of Defense, versus the cyber domain and everything, and that's the operational commander, which is for many in the CIO lane, I would argue, a little bit of a shift. The CIO lane has been able to say, okay, we'll buy it, we'll fix it, we'll maintain it, and then we'll give it to you, and then you can do something with it. And our question now is, of course, is that really the right model for the future? Okay, and all of this is to bring you to this question, which I actually would like to put to you and get your thoughts. And I hate people that read slides, so I won't read the slide to you. But how do we do this? I'll give you a second. And I do have one example of how we've been able to do this. And when I say do this, I would roughly say, how do we balance the responsibilities of CIO and Cohen with the responsibilities of Goldwater Nichols in the combatant commands? And so at this point, that actually is my class, and I'd like to open it up for discussion. So if you do have a comment or a question, I'd ask you to go to the microphone so that everyone can hear, including me. It's quite noisy in here. They said theater. I thought it would actually be a theater, not just like kind of in the corner. And I know I have some experts out there. I was talking to a few of them, and I see some people out there that work 3 cubicles over from me, so I know there'll be a question or two. Well, in the event that there is a question, I'll give you one of the examples, actually, that we've been working on. So about a year and a bit ago, there was a new Cyber Operations Forces, COF is what we call it, memo that was put out by Secretary of Defense, which actually added CSSPs, cybersecurity service providers, as an additional member of Cyber Operations Forces, just like CPTs and just like Cyber National Mission Force and Cyber Mission Teams. So essentially what that memo did was it gave Cybercom the responsibility for joint training. They are now able to actually establish joint training standards for CSSPs. However, one of the things that the COF memo did not do is it did not give Cybercom any funding to actually pay for or fund CSSPs. The funding streams did not change. They stayed with the services, DISA, of course, the big elephant in the room, and Defense Capital Working Fund. And so all the services now essentially can still go out and purchase CSSP services off the street, as it were. And JFHQ DODIN, through DRSI, our inspections wing, we still retain the responsibility for certifying CSSPs, but we do that under currently, I believe, it's ESM 10. Which is a big, long checklist of things that if you do these correctly, you get to become a CSSP, and that's how we authorize CSSPs. And by the way, if there's at any point there's a question, please go to the mic, and I'll take your question. So for about a year now, what we've been doing is we've been thinking about how... Oh, Mr. Foster, what is your question, sir?
Hey, Colonel Flahan. Check. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, sir.
Hey, yeah, it wasn't really a question. It was really just to answer to your problem statement as a possible solution. My suggestion was going to be that, as it kind of pointed out in the directive type memo as well, that the process really has to be a partnership throughout the entire cycle. At different parts of the combat development cycle, as we would traditionally know it in the military, instead of having one person that is the lead, well, maybe back up. One person should always be in the lead, or one entity, I should say in this particular case, CIO, or the operational headquarters, U.S. Cybercom, as delegated to Joint Force Headquarters, DODIN, for those decisions. So it's a yin and a yang throughout the entire process. I think before the operational implementation of any new capability, any new system, I think that's when U.S. Cybercom would take lead as we call it, the operational authority to operate. So it's really with the operational lens and viewpoint. And I think during many other parts of the cycle, the CIO would have the lead, as they normally do, for the acquisition portions, the evaluating the capabilities, the technical risks, et cetera. So I think that in this unique environment where what we're what we're purchasing, what we're putting on our network is the terrain we're fighting. I think it's a very unique, and we have to really kind of figure out that yin and yang, and I know it's still developing and emerging and a difficult problem set to work through, but I think at the end of the day, it's really going to have to be, tightly knit.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Couldn't agree more. And I want to be clear, there's not, thank you, sir, there's not actually a move to replace Klinger Cohen from, I think, the Cybercom perspective. And I'll be honest, Cybercom doesn't actually have the ability to do what the CIO does. And I certainly don't think that they actually want to do that. So absolutely right, sir. There has to be a partnership because, Cybercom doesn't need to be in the business of going out and vetting vendors and developing technology. Cybercom needs to be in the business of actually employing that technology in the cyberspace domain. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, sir, you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk about one of the challenges that we've seen is when you talk about the CCORI process at JFHQ DODIN issues today, where you're trying to determine what the key terrain cyber is. It's basically done through a mission mapping workbook that enables that inspection process. Then you have the MADS program that's done under NSWC Dahlgren that is attempting to map that key terrain back to the mission impact. And then you have data sets like COMS from the CIO side is within DISA that is run by DISA and EMAS. And none of that information is fused to be able to give that picture of what the points of demarcation are, what the risk to mission is. Is there any initiative to look at how we're implementing these capabilities and buying these siloed data solutions to create an integrated picture to inform the combatant commander?
So, thank you for your question, sir. For those of you that maybe didn't hear, the question is, we have MADS, we have CCRIs, we have all of these other data sources out there, and is there an effort to get kind of a handle on that and really, as we would understand, map the DODIN? And so I don't want to get too far into classification, which I think I very easily could, but so the short answer is yes. That is a problem for us, and we spend a lot of time and resources on it. And as anybody who owns or operates a network knows, if you don't know your network, you're not really operating it, nor are you securing it. So yes, we are. I couldn't talk about what those initiatives actually are. I would easily violate the classification of the room, but yes, sir, we are. Yes, sir.
Hey, great talk, by the way. So I've been admiring this problem, this dichotomy that you define for a while now. I think a lot of people have. And I think it's really bad because at the combatant command that I support, I see it every day. CIOs doing what CIOs do, but as a result, they're accepting operational risks that they don't fully comprehend, nor is it their risk to accept. It's the combatant commanders, for example, right? I think your slide did a good job kind of explaining that. So that's a huge issue across the Department of Defense, and it really sucks. It makes it hard to get things done, right? So I appreciate the discussion, and I'm wondering, Cyber Command, as the FCC now, is there something? I'm tracking clear. Cohen isn't necessarily getting redone anytime soon, and I don't think anybody's looking at Goldwater or Nichols anytime soon. Is there any initiative at Cyber Command to kind of herd these cats amongst the combatant commands, since at least on the DODIN side, since Commander U.S. Cyber Command owns the entirety of the DODIN, and they have that directive authority for cyber operations where they can task the other combatant commanders. Is there any initiative underway to make some sense of this for the combatant commanders?
Yes, absolutely. And so, first of all, I appreciate your admission that this is a very large problem, and it's going to take a lot of years to figure out because, as we've been growing the culture and, the infrastructure behind, CIO, now we're starting to turn that to Cybercom. But to answer your question, yes, and in fact, that's talking point number 4 from our commander, which is partnerships. And I will tell you quite clearly that from the JFHQ DODIN perspective, we don't really see a difference between CIO, DISA, and Cybercom. Where we sit at our headquarters, we absolutely are, I would almost argue, and Mr. Foster, our executive director, can disagree with me if he likes, but But I actually believe that JFHQ DODIN, we're kind of the linchpin in that discussion between Cybercom, CIO, and then of course, DISA as the executor. And I see Mr. Foster going to the microphone.
No, I concur with your assessment. I was just going to, and I think you mentioned it earlier, but I was going to double down on the directive type memo that actually did address this and said, hey, we recognize this as an issue. You need to, but it stopped short of actually giving a solution, right? It said work together to figure this thing out. So to your point, yes, big problem, which is why we wanted to make it a topic of discussion here at AFCEA. But I think we, in earnest, are going to continue to try to get after it in this next, few months, this next fiscal year, as one to try to get to a more comprehensive solution. But not going away anytime soon. So.
Yes, sir. Yeah, which is actually a nice segue into what I was talking about. Actually, what we've done with CSSP, operationalization is a terrible word. I have to say it every day. But essentially what that directed Cybercom to do was to take over the joint training of CSSPs. Well, it just so happened that the CIO had tasked JFHQ DODIN. I'm not going to say we sometimes get CIO tasks at JFHQ DODIN, but sometimes we get tasks from CIO at JFHQ DODIN. And we were actually asked to rewrite the ESM 11, which is the manual that is used for certifying CSSPs. And somebody in the headquarters named Matt Feehan had a bright idea. Why don't we combine that with what we're doing with CSSP operationalization? And so what we actually did was we took the JMETs, which have actually been approved by the combatant commander, or by General Nakasone right now. Those have been approved, and we used those for the basis of how we would redefine ESM 11. So when we issue the order to all the DAOs from JFHQ DODIN's perspective to all the services and the components, and we tell them, look, here's your new training standards for CSSPs. Simultaneously, or very close to that, the CIO will release a new ESM 11, which will match as best as it can, a little bit of English or translation between, combat development and CIO language, but we're pretty damn close. And so actually what we think we'll have are two documents that are actually finally talking to each other. And so we think, at least as far as the CSSPs go, we might not have so much tension because we'll actually be working from the same document, right? And we had many with the previous acting CIO. I don't know that we've engaged the current acting CIO on this issue, but the previous CIO, we briefed him the planning for CSSP optimization, and they were all for it. I mean, they absolutely loved it. So to answer your question, yes, partnerships every day. And so are they going to redo Clarence Cohen and Goldwater Nichols? Sure, Congress is going to do something someday. But in the interim, right, we have to be professionals and we have to carry on the mission, which nobody in my organization thinks for a hot minute that the CIO doesn't understand what the mission is. So, yes, sir.
Hi, Frank Kidd, computer science teacher, former DCA employee, and retired IT specialist. 30 years ago, when I was working for DCA, I heard that when all else fails, read the directions. So I just read the mission statement of U.S. Cyber Command, and from my take, the Cyber Command fights in the cyber war and defends the network. And so since they conduct the operations, they would also have to do the metrics for determine their success or failure.
Yes.
The CIO needs to provide the Cyber Command with what it needs to do that. So in my opinion, the Cyber Command is one of the CIO's most important customers. And so that's going to require that classic, customer-provider relationship from an idea all the way to implementation. Thanks.
Yes, sir. And actually, I would argue that we are doing that. You'll note that the commander of JFHQ DODIN is the DISA director. And so General Skinner reports directly to the CIO as his hat as DISA director, and directly to Cybercom as the commander of Joint Force Headquarters DODIN. So at least as far as we can, given the constraints of Clarence Cohen, I think from a communication standpoint and development of requirements, I actually think we're doing pretty good, at least as well as we can. But I completely concur. Cybercom really is the CIO's largest customer right now. I think that's a good way of putting it. Thank you, sir. Wow, 55 minutes. That went quick. Oh, I'm sorry. I started at 10:30. It's only been 25. Okay, well, I've got plenty of time for more comments or questions. Like I said, we don't have an answer for this. I mean, I have a personal opinion, and it's worth about what my Coke cost, which was $4. I couldn't believe it. But I'll take some more questions if anybody has, and I'm happy to hang around and have this discussion. I'm a strategist, and I like to do these kinds of plannings. Don't let me off the hook. Going once, going twice. All right, well, thank you very much. I really appreciated the discussion and the conversation. I'll be around all day. I'm man on the booth this afternoon. Come by. We have some Haribo gummy candies. So please come by and see us. Thanks very much.